Welcome to the Balanced Ambition podcast. I'm your host, Matt Southam. Here, we delve into candid conversations with entrepreneurs, exploring both their business journey and their secrets to maintaining mental well-being. As we navigate the balance of ambition and inner peace, I hope you find insights, inspiration, and invaluable takeaways in every episode. Thank you for joining us. Hi, Emma. Welcome to the show. I want to ask you, first of all, what is it you do and why is it important?
Okay. Well, I'll try and answer that one. But first of all, thank you for having me.
Pleasure.
I'm very pleased to talk to you and anyone else who's interested because what I do because I have a massive passion for changing the way children learn, basically. If I could wave a magic wand, the schools that we have today would disappear and it would be a completely different way that, we saw our children growing through their early years and later. But basically what I do is I'm one of the co-founders of edtech company, which is teaching children English around the world. And we do it, I think, by focusing on why are the children learning English? And the short answer to that is because it's a life-changing skill. But we also are changing the how they're learning it, and we're doing it in a way that is fun and engaging, of which there are other companies doing the same thing. But I think our USP, if you like, our special magic sauce is that we do it and then we encourage them to actually meet up online, which is controversial in itself. And I can talk a little bit about how we put protections around that, but we encourage them to use their English as soon as they start to get, as soon as they can say who they are and where they live and how many brothers or sisters they've got. We get them to message each other and make those connections so they can see the real purpose. It has a real purpose. You're actually able to reach out and make a friend somewhere else in the world through the medium of English. So.
Yeah, no, that makes complete sense. I mean, I've got a couple of questions on that. First of all, let's talk about the school system and the way that people are taught. You mentioned you'd like to change it completely. What's your biggest sort of bugbear with the current education system here in the UK?
I think, well, not only in the UK, but around the world, I think we're forgetting what we're actually going to need in the future. And, a knowledge-based system is out of date almost as soon as you start it. So a lot of the things that I learned back in the day when I was at school, are no longer applicable. So I think that what we should be focusing on is skills. And obviously I put language skills, particularly English language, in what we're doing as one of those skills, but, learning to think critically, to ask those questions, to be creative. I think the way we manage to squash children's creativity over the years they're at school, when you think about, when you see young children, very young children, the sky's the limit in terms of what they can think and do and how they're exploring the world. And so I think putting more meaning into, what children are learning, but, in a way we're stuck because we have to figure out also how do we evaluate what kids are doing? And I don't think we've sorted that out yet. And then on a much more basic level, we have to figure out, okay, so if they're not going to be sitting in classrooms from whatever time in the morning to whatever time in the evening, how are we going to organize that other role of education as it is today? And that is childcare. I mean, basically, for lots of parents, it's the way that they can go and do what they're doing because they know that they can put their child is safely, shut away in the school. So the whole purpose of schools and what they're there for mean we've got to ask ourselves some pretty demanding questions. Okay, so if they're not going to be in a classroom from whatever to whatever time, where are they going to be and what are they going to do and how are we going to cover that and what's the role of the teacher and where do the parents fit in? And so some pretty big systemic questions that need to be addressed. So yeah.
Yeah, I can see that it actually it's not so much the recognizing the issue in the current system, and I agree. I sometimes think, I remember my sort of secondary school years, and the fault now of taking teenagers where you've got all these hormones going on, who are all very different, and
Yeah.
taking 30 of them, put them in a classroom on a really strict regime of
Mhm.
this class time, this class time. It seems bizarre, but
Yeah.
actually it is the system we've got. It's the system that we operate under, and like you say, with the maybe the academic testing at the end to see how they've done. And I sometimes think, when I talk about this, and I'm critical of the system, this isn't against teachers. Their job is to
Absolutely.
teach them a curriculum to pass a test at the end. That is their role, and they do that very well. It's the
Mhm.
system around that. But
Mhm.
how do you change that from something that's very historic?
Mhm.
And I actually sort of worry, would any government ever take it on, because it's such a large project
Yeah.
that could go wrong, and then how do you test it? Yeah, it's very hard to change.
It is very hard to change. I mean, I think there are signs of change. Like I was listening to the news the other day, and it was talking about that massive rise in homeschooling, for example,
Yeah,
that has kind of happened partly because of the pandemic, but um, online schools, hybrid schools, hybrid learning, so a bit of online, bit of face to face. And yes, just to pick up on what you said about teachers. I mean, I started my professional life as a teacher many years ago. I know how hard that job is, and I think it's only got harder. And I am the number one fan of teachers, and I think, and we pour an awful lot of um, responsibility and expectation on them, and then we stick them in a system that makes it very hard for them to deliver on that. So I think most teachers, when you take away all the sort of very, very demanding tasks that they have around the actual job of teaching, when you talk to them about what they're trying to do with a classroom or an individual child, class full of children or an individual child, they're almost all 100% passionate about the fact that they want the very best, and they want to help those children step out into a positive future. But the system kind of gets in the way, I'm afraid. But like I said, I do think there are little signs of change. But my biggest concern about that at the moment is that it now has become a kind of almost a luxury. If you're in the position to be able to homeschool your child, or um, probably means both parents don't have to be out at work all day. So that already means a lot of people can't even think about it. Or indeed, if you've opted to go to an online school at the moment, then fee paying, so not insignificant. So I mean, that's the other aspect of education that bothers me profoundly, is the inequality, that
yeah,
whether we're talking about within the UK, and certainly when you look around the world, there's a huge gap, and that is one of the problems that on a global scale we are facing today. Most of the problems that the world is facing come from the inequalities that exist. So and education is, in my mind, definitely one of the ways that you can fix this. And so going back to what we do, one of the biggest challenges is making sure that what we offer is affordable, which is challenging because there are big costs around
yeah,
building an edtech platform, maintaining it, and so on and so forth. But if it becomes, again, just a thing that only some people can access, then I feel like I personally, but as a company, have failed on our mission, because opening up access to learning English is one of the things that I set out to do at the beginning, because otherwise we're talking about, well, that if you're a child in another country, you either can afford to go to a private school that offers English, or you can afford a tutor to help you with English, or indeed, if you're a school trying to teach English, you can afford to pay for very expensive materials to do that. So, again, that's one of the things that we're trying to figure out how to solve.
Yeah, I can really see there are some inequalities, even in the UK within the education system. Both the system that exists is in, what school you go to, and we know there's, people move into certain areas to get into
Yes,
a state school, whether they can afford private, but equally the support you're able to give a child when they're back at home. And
yes.
I saw some stats on this. I remember I try and read with my children quite a lot as
Mhm,
they've been growing up, and I've had
mhm,
the time and been able to do that. Some
mhm,
parents physically don't, because the kids are
mhm,
back and they're straight out to work because they're working
mhm,
shifts, and
mhm,
children can fall behind through no fault of
mhm.
their own. Just
Right.
that, within a school environment, if there's 30 children in a class, sort of
Mhm,
reception year 1, year 2, teachers can't concentrate one-on-one reading time every single
mhm,
day for each child. It
mhm,
just doesn't work. So being able to do that at home is a real benefit to them. But of
mhm.
course, there's
Yeah.
inequality based on our lifestyles.
Totally, totally. And some of the choices we've made as a society, like for example, closing down libraries. I mean, I think that's cardinal sin that we've done
Mhm.
that because that immediately means a lot of kids just have no access to books for no fault of their own and no fault of their parents quite often either. And
No.
and so um, again, as you say, when they start school, they're starting at a massive disadvantage, and there's lots of data that proves it's very hard for them to catch up. I mean, you have some standout cases of, people who there's that young professor at Cambridge who didn't learn to speak or read or write until much later in life, but that's an exception. Most
Yeah.
people who set out with those kind of disadvantages, they carry them through life. So, yeah,
Yeah, I
we're
mean,
not doing great at the moment. I don't, there are some brilliant, brilliant schools, brilliant teachers. There are lots of people in my sector who are committed to try and make change, but it's quite a struggle. It definitely is.
yeah, I mean, whether it's education or sport, and I often like comparing things to sport. It's a competitive environment, but we see
Mhm,
that a lot with a lot of the professional sports people.
mhm,
Either they've, from a very young age, been
mhm,
consistently playing that sport.
mhm,
Again, you need that support right from the early start if you're going to make it
mhm,
professionally in your 20s. And then I
mhm,
saw a stat, and I can't remember exactly what it is, but it was to do with our Olympic team. And
mhm.
whatever it was, the majority were privately educated,
Yeah,
and the the connection was that allowed them time to train during the day. It allowed
yeah,
them time before class, end of class,
yeah.
and that's just what it is. The current system doesn't allow the time if you're going to concentrate on a sport. And
Well, I mean, again, going not wanting to get too political, but if you go back to decisions to sell off school playing fields, in
yeah,
the state system, all that kind of thing has we're beginning to see what that means now for us as a society. So,
yeah,
anyway, to be positive, I do believe that change is possible, but yeah, I think it's very necessary now. So,
yeah.
yeah.
Well, there is proof, because you're here doing something about that. So, how did that come about? You mentioned you used to be a teacher. How did you progress from teaching into, starting a
What
business?
was it? Yeah. Well, actually, I moved from being a teacher to working in children's content. So, as a children's book writer and illustrator, and published lots and lots of books for children, many with my partner, who's also a writer. He's also a linguist, and that's relevant. And I'll come to that later. I'm not. I'm not at all. Um, and yeah, and I was again one of the things that struck me moving into that world was just how amazing and beautiful children's books were. And, that again, back in my day when I was a child, there were lots of standard, very nice children's books, but with none of the sort of really delicious production values that you have in I mean, children's books now are works of art. They're beautiful,
Yeah,
So, so I saw this very rapidly changing world of children's publishing. And then I looked at sort of standard school textbooks and thought, everyone is quite happy to sort of lower their standards. So I remember thinking, if I ever did something for schools, I would definitely try and bring over the same kind of production values from the sort of commercial, a consumer market and bring it into schools publishing. And then I started my own family, and I've got 4 kids. And at one point, and you see the sort of lines beginning to cross over now, because of my partner's work, we moved to Europe, and we took the whole family there, and we put them into school there. And to start with, I homeschooled them for a while, and then we put them into the local school, and it was wonderful. And it meant we sort of put on one side all the decisions we knew were coming up about schooling for them in the UK and all the rest of it. And basically we saw them absolutely flourish. I can remember being, because the eldest was at, where was he? He was at middle school. And I remember the headmaster saying, oh, this is very reckless to do this. And I felt, well, we've got to, otherwise we're going to be living apart as a family. So we're going to do that. And in fact, it was nonsense. He adapted very quickly and he loved it. And they all learned another language very, very quickly. So then I started thinking about, it's really bad the way that English kids don't learn languages early enough, whereas, in Europe they do. They all learn, because they're their neighbours. But the most important thing I think that stuck in my mind was how often people said to me, your children are so lucky because they speak English. And I suddenly sort of flipped it over and thought, yeah, this is the thing. My kids have got this, accidental advantage in that they're English speakers. So it's great that they're learning other languages, and they all speak more than one foreign language now. And I think that's partly because it became part of their life when they were very young. But most importantly, they had this incredible gift of speaking English. So I started to look into that. And then I was able to bring the two things together. Okay, we're going to find a way of teaching English that is much more relevant and exciting and uses technology. I'd started really getting into technology through my kids mainly. And we're going to bring those brilliant production values to what we do as a school product. And that's how it all started.
And and how's that journey been? Talk me through starting through to, because starting a business it's exciting, and if you've got a passion behind it, you're committed to it, but it comes with lots of challenges. So how did you balance that?
Very badly to start with. I mean, I threw myself into it and, took on this big challenge of, in the market, it was very heavily dominated by some very, very world famous and long-standing giants. So that in itself was a challenge. It was a challenge to sort of get together a team that was both technically what we needed and also had the same passion for what we were doing and that kind of thing. And then raising money for it. All kinds of horror stories linked to that. Being a woman in those, there's no doubt. I don't really like bleating and making being female a reason for, not achieving things or, finding things more. But there's undoubtedly, again, there's enough data published these days that women find it much harder to raise investment, be taken seriously in lots of ways, get invited to do things like podcasts. Again, I see change happening now, and I do see the challenges that women have faced and continue to face, sort of now aligning with the similar challenges that young male entrepreneurs or male entrepreneurs of any age are facing, and that is this incredible pressure to be the best, the fastest, the quickest, the hardest working, and all the rest of it. Which, I definitely fell into that trap. Like I think just about everybody I know, somehow believing that if I'm first in the office, last to leave the office, go home, eat something, then be back on the online again, in my particular case, I guess my biggest excuse to myself and to you is that we had international customers, different time zones. So, when my family used to groan because I used to get up from the table and say, right, I've got to go and take a call now from someone in Latin America, the excuse I was giving to myself was, well, it's the middle of their day, so I've got to do that if I want to speak to clients elsewhere. And that still holds. But I think what I've learned to do is when I know that's going to happen, and it happens a lot, I'm going to take some time out elsewhere in the day. I'm
Yeah.
going to compensate. And it took me a long time to get to that sort of kind of attempt to get some balance into what I was doing.
Yeah, there is definitely that culture, and it's perhaps what we see online, or perhaps just how we feel it should be.
Yeah.
We feel if we're growing a business, we've got to work every hour. Think about the business every hour that we're awake,
Yes.
and also,
Dream about it.
yeah, dream about it. And also, I suppose when you're growing a team, you want to feel like, or maybe demonstrate to them, look, I'm working really, really hard as well. So you try and put in more hours, and like you say, be first in the office,
Then,
last to leave. But it's not always actually, a positive thing for yourself, your body or your mind. Yeah, did that come up? Did you struggle
oh,
there?
totally. I mean, there was a definite period in my life when I came close to saying, "Oh, just pack it in." It's just too much, and I felt physically exhausted. I was I picked up silly, infections over and over again, a bit like you do when you have your children all under the age of 5, and you seem to get everything that's going.
Yeah,
Well, it felt a bit like I'd moved into that sort of zone, and also I began to not exactly lose my love or passion for what I was doing, but that somehow I was seeing it through a veil. It was like I've often referred to it as like a twilight zone, going into
mm,
this thing where it's no longer giving me the joy. Um, or even, to be honest, it was no longer giving me the fear in the same way. It was a kind of, I'd moved into this slightly, I mean, there's all kinds of words that I could use, like complacent, but that's not quite right. But it was then that I thought, okay, something's got to change. So yeah, it was a long journey to get to that, but I hope I'm doing better now. So yeah.
that's good to hear. So, what have you changed then? How do you stay disciplined on maybe reducing your hours or taking time for yourself?
Hmm. I've tried to make weekends, really weekends, and do things, that are things that I like outside of work. Or sometimes they're not actually, sometimes they're related. Like, I love reading about what other people are doing, or I love talking to other entrepreneurs or listening to podcasts and reading, about the latest technologies, and immediately thinking, okay, how will that apply to what we do? Can we
Yeah.
improve what we're doing by implementing something new? So it's not that, but it's kind of doing that within a context that this is, I'm choosing to do this. I'm choosing, and it's relaxing, and I'm enjoying it. And the minute it isn't, then put it aside. So that, I had to do a very definite sort of gear shift in my own head. I also 2 years ago acquired a Labrador puppy, and I'd had Labradors for quite many, many years, but during the period when I first started the business, I hadn't. And I think I'd probably forgotten about what a handful that is, but it's been a very positive handful because apart from anything else, it requires exercise. And so that
Yeah.
means, never mind that all the tracking apps and things like that. I just know that if I don't get off my backside and away from my laptop and get out and about with the dog, and the trouble will brew or trouble will happen. So having something like that, I'm not recommending everybody gets a bouncy Labrador, but something that you do that is physical and just is a completely different activity than even the pleasurable reading around your subject, or that's still very sedentary. So I think physical activity was a big thing for me, and that had almost fallen away. I spent so much time sitting down working,
Mm.
and I've definitely felt the benefits of that. So so
Yeah,
that was
I definitely agree with getting up and moving, and equally having something else that's a commitment that forces you to step away from the desk. So I
really.
remember I used to do the I'd now do the school run on a Wednesday, but I used to do it on a Friday, and the reason it was a Friday was because I used to go to an early networking group, so I was always out the house sort of 5:30, 6 a.m. And I should be able to on the Friday, having done, yeah, I'd done more than 40 hours during the first 4 days anyway. Yeah, to
Mhm,
finish at 2:30 on a Friday. But I
mhm,
got into that stage of saying, "Oh, I'm going to finish early on a Friday, finish early on a
mhm.
Friday." And what that ended up meaning was about 5:30, which isn't early at all. But by
That's it.
by going, I'm going to do the school run. Well, I
Mhm,
had to be there. There was no, I couldn't leave at that point. My eldest daughter was sort of 5 years
abs-
old. Couldn't leave her waiting at the school gate. Yeah, I had
mhm,
to be there, and it forced me to finish.
mhm,
And
mhm,
exactly the same, I guess, with having a puppy that need to go out for the walk. Actually, that's
mhm,
probably even a slightly better one. You're getting up, you're getting out the house, you're moving
mhm,
about, um,
mhm,
and something to force you. And I think then eventually we do develop the habit of
mhm,
being able to do it, but we
mhm.
almost need our hands to be forced at the start to be able to develop that habit.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think the other thing is, I guess the other thing about what you're talking about, sort of doing something like going to the school, there's no competition involved there. There's no, I've got to apart from making sure you're there on time,
Yeah,
that's it. And same with walking a dog. I'm not in a race. I'm just, I'm following his pace actually. Um, and the rest of the world falls away really. And you kind of focus on something very, very basic. And I mean, I do check my step count when I've done my walk, so I suppose there's a little element I do go and think, oh, have I done more walking today than I did yesterday? But basically, I think that's also really good to sort of step out of any kind of pressure that I've got to do really well, I've got to do really better, and just sort of, I mean, the famous word, just chilling a bit,
yeah.
but it's jolly hard to do when you're trying to grow a business, definitely.
Yeah,
Uh,
it's really hard. I often, say just the way my brain works, I seem like I have multiple tabs open at all the time, and
Yeah,
it's just trying to make sure actually you're just concentrating on
mm,
one where you're there and having
yeah,
something that you are fully committed to. I
yeah.
had a guest on the podcast, David from it's slipped my mind. That's Staple Clothing, and
Mhm,
he was saying one of his big things. He actually likes to go out with people who have got nothing to do with the business, don't even work in a business. And the reason for
mhm,
this is a lot of the time we're told to hang around with equal people or people
mhm,
in business to learn
mhm,
from, and that can be really great. But he says occasionally he just likes to go to the pub with people who know nothing about business because
mhm,
he doesn't then get dragged into talking about business and can completely switch off. And
yeah,
and actually, I thought that was really insightful because I very much, committed. You're the sum of the five people you hang around with, and there's all of that sort of
mhm,
idea. So I'd always be like, well, hang around with these people, and we'd all bounce ideas off. But actually, sometimes you just need to escape
you do.
from the work environment.
Yeah. Definitely, definitely, definitely. Yeah. And you're right. I mean, networking and, talking to your peers, and then, people who are people who are competing with you, but also people who are doing similar things but different. Sort of,
Yeah,
definitely important. And, building that community, which again comes back to what we try to do with our platform, is building this community of kids who are all on the same journey or in different stages of the same journey, but they're learning the value of interacting with others, finding out about others. And I sat in once on the most amazing conversation. When I say sat in, I was looking at the moderating that was happening, because we moderate the community both with all the usual technical tools, but also we have human moderators
yeah,
checking that everything's okay. Um, and I just saw the most amazing conversation with some kids from Latin America talking to some kids in Europe, kids in Turkey, which is almost Europe, and then in Asia, in Korea. And they just happened to all come on at the same time. But of course, it was very different times of day for all of them. So they were all talking about things like, what do you have for breakfast? And, and they were, sort of saying, oh, how weird, or we have this and we have that. So, there was the usual kind of thing. But then at one point, the child in Korea said his mum had said he had to go to bed, so he was leaving. And the others said, why? Why have you got to go? And then they realised. And so, I just thought, oh, bingo. Not only have we got them using their English, and the communications are very simple and, very often open. They get things wrong because they're not quite saying it correctly. But overall, they were managing to communicate, as I say, about ordinary things like breakfast and favourite sports and that kind of thing. But then this time zone thing hit. And I just thought, that's amazing. So suddenly these children are kind of getting that sort of awareness of how the world works and that kind of thing. So, so the value of communities, and I absolutely fundamentally believe that we are a connected world. We're just not connecting very effectively at the moment, and we're tending to fall into our own little bubbles and living within our own little. And I think same for work. I like to talk to people who are doing things that are completely different to me, and I can see things that are we have in common, because we're running a business, for example, or maybe because we're involved in education, or maybe it's because of technology. But we're also different, and I think that is so important that we are. And that, going back to your question about education, that's what I think we should be helping our children to do, to be open and curious and interested in connecting with, and ultimately in the world, in their future, being able to collaborate and work together. Scientists do it brilliantly already. That you get scientific collaborations around the world, and I just think we need to do that a whole lot more in every other field of life.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think as humans, we're much more alike than we are different. It's just across all communities and areas, and I think part of it is possibly to do with the negative bias that humans have. And yes, at one point it was there to keep us safe and secure. But actually, we don't need that same negative bias towards someone lives in a different country, or they look a bit different, or whatever it is. Actually, you will tend to find most people are much more alike than they are different. And building that community, I think, is key.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I can totally vouch for that and say that is what I've experienced throughout my working life and getting to know clients in different parts of the world. We have so much more in common. And on the other hand, I think it's great that we're proud of our own individual and particular, traditions, characteristics, and all that. I mean, how boring would the world be if we all were the same? But we all like the same thing, or think of food. Just how amazing, and how in my lifetime, certainly the whole culinary global, culinary thing has opened up. Whereas I mean, it was roast beef and Yorkshire pudding only when I was a little girl. So, so those kind of things, there are so many signs that this is a positive thing, but unfortunately, an awful lot of what goes on is to try and other people and, and focus, as you say, on the negatives and the things that divide us. So, that's the big mistake.
Yeah, but what you're doing is helping connect people, and actually maybe, language is one of the things, and perhaps, certainly here in England, one of the things that disconnects us from the rest of the world. I know, and the argument will be, well, lots of other people speak English, but actually, I'd almost say we don't even attempt to
Oh,
learn any
absolutely.
other language. And
Yeah.
bearing in mind at secondary school, I did do a language. I wouldn't
Mhm.
even say that, I can probably count to 10.
Mhm.
From a couple of years of education, it wasn't set up necessarily that I can communicate. And actually, I lived in Greece for 2 6-month periods, and actually, my Greek is better than what I did,
I bet it.
at school. And it was more about just I got to a stage where even if I couldn't communicate back, I could listen to a conversation and start to understand what was sort of going on. I could work out what was being spoken about,
Yeah.
whether this was a good situation to be in or a bad
Yeah, I
situation. I
mean,
could,
yeah.
you could
Yeah, no,
you
it's
could pick
I mean,
that
it's
up.
yeah, I mean, it is all about communication. And to your point, yes, English people definitely, don't feel as obliged to learn foreign languages as I say, for example, our European friends do. Um, but on the other hand, I also feel that English isn't actually it doesn't actually belong to the English or England or the United Kingdom or however. I mean, English is the world's language. I mean, it is the language that has been adopted. And yes, Spanish is very important, Mandarin obviously,
Yep.
but English is the one. And as I say, there is enough data now. From various business schools and social surveys that say if you cannot deal with basic English communication, you are going to probably be excluded from all kinds of life chances and opportunities. So yeah, but yeah, I'd love English people to learn more languages as well. I think it's great, and even if you never become proficient, as you say, it still opens up your mind to all kinds of what's the word? Sort of understandings about how other people operate and all the rest of it. And basically, I'm sad that it's not more fun. Basically, which is
Yeah.
definitely what we try and make what we do actually fun for kids to do. So
Yeah, yeah. When something's fun, we're much more committed to it. I mean, you were talking about, a business and not enjoying the journey as much. And actually, I see that in business, yes, most of us got these big goals, the end goal, but actually,
mm,
that's not really the bit that we enjoy because when you get there, the goal will just move.
yes,
The
yeah,
bit that you need to enjoy is the journey.
yeah,
And that's the bit
day to day.
we should concentrate more on. We tend to sacrifice our journey, our days to hit
Mhm.
this goal, this amount of employees, this turnover, whatever it is. But when you
Yeah,
get there, all you do is you set a higher goal. So
another one.
you've never finished.
Yeah,
If you're not enjoying the journey, there's literally no point.
yeah, yeah, absolutely, totally. Yeah, I mean that would be my biggest word of my experience to any new entrepreneur, anyone thinking about starting a business. I mean, I definitely say focus on being in the moment and enjoying what you're doing, and if it isn't, then probably isn't right. That doesn't mean say you've got to stop, but you do need to stop and think, okay, what can I shift, even the tiniest thing, to make this more of a kind of mm, what's the word? A positive experience. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, because I think work takes up so much of our daily life, and so
it does.
even more so when you're running your own business because
Yeah,
you do often work long hours, and
yeah,
if you're not enjoying it, actually
yeah,
you need to change something within there, and it could be just changing, sometimes reducing your hours or working on a
mm,
different part of the business or
mhm,
and actually that's a really important point. I think when we start, we do everything within the business, where we're
yeah,
marketing, we're HR, we're,
yeah,
all of the different areas. Work out what you really enjoy, what you're good at,
mm,
and try and
mhm,
outsource the other bits as
yeah,
quickly as possible to get
yeah, yeah,
people in who are one better at it, but to enjoy it.
yeah, 100%. And even if you're not kind of employing full on employees to do these jobs. I mean, there are so many people now out there providing really excellent services to particularly small businesses, but sometimes quite large businesses that, who bring a very particular skill set. And, I think you should never turn your nose up at that, just being
No.
able to, sort of take on someone who's really good at marketing or somebody, finance or whatever, and use their skills as you need them. So, and that's, again, that's about being in the moment and doing what's necessary today. and yes, having those long-term goals, but not obsessing so much that suddenly your next goal is, I must have X number of employees, like you said. And
Yeah.
it's nonsense. It's not.
Yeah.
It's yeah. But
No.
it's so easy to go down that rabbit hole, I think.
Yeah, very much so. I think there's a very, you know, well, I think when we were talking earlier, we used the word toxic, that
Mhm.
toxic environment of, other people defining what success looks like for you, but actually you need to define what success looks like for
Yeah.
you, and then building the journey around that.
Yeah.
Because for some people it is just to be a single freelancer working for themselves, being able to choose the hours, work around maybe other commitments,
Mhm.
and that's successful.
Absolutely.
But equally,
Absolutely.
if you want 25 people in a town centre office and that's
Mm.
success, fine. That's your goal.
Yeah.
One isn't better than the other. It's just what your version of success is, and
Absolutely.
and go for that and enjoy the journey.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Enjoy the journey. That's a very good. That's a very good summary, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's
I want
hard.
it is hard. It is maybe on that, because I normally finish with, what tip would you give to someone starting the business? And we've defined there. You've almost said enjoy the journey. What would be your tip to someone to help them understand
Mhm.
how to do that?
Mm. Yeah, I've been asked this question a lot of times, and far be it from me to pretend to know all the answers. But I mean, I think the first thing, you need to be really sure that you are not just a solution looking for a problem. I think, you need to have an idea of what you're trying to achieve with what you're doing. And, my experience, what your solution is probably going to change and evolve, and probably needs to. And it's highly unlikely that the thing you think is a wonderful idea now is actually going to be what you end up in the end, and that's good. I think it's like life, like it evolves. So make sure you really are addressing something that you think, yeah, this needs to change. That would be my first thing. And then secondly, make sure you really do want to be the person who is absolutely solely responsible for getting this off the ground. Because I do think, again, there's been a sort of glamorization of entrepreneurship. Now, of course, I absolutely feel that there is in almost everybody a little bit of entrepreneurship, that we're all basically entrepreneurs in all kinds of different ways, in the broadest sense of that term. But I do think there's been a lot of pressure, particularly on young people today. Oh, don't become someone who works for someone else. Be an entrepreneur to control your own life, sort of thing. So I think make sure that you've at least thought very hard about, okay, what's this probably going to mean,
Mm.
um, and then thirdly, once you've taken that leap, um, almost, I mean, if I could speak to myself at the beginning, it would be start setting some boundaries, which I did not do. And an awful lot of people I know who run or started businesses or running business didn't do that. And I'm afraid that story generally doesn't end up very happily, I mean, and even if outwardly they seem to be doing brilliantly and you hear them speaking on panels or you meet them at events and they seem super together, when you get to know these people, and I've got to know a lot of people since I started, almost almost without exception, they've described some of the pain and the uh, the prices that they've paid for
Mm.
being on this kind of obsessive entrepreneurial journey. So I think, yeah, the piece of advice I would have given myself was, just start setting the boundaries early, start deciding, that doesn't mean say you're going to lose your passion or not, but, definitely do not listen to those people who try to suggest that you're not ambitious just because you actually save the weekend for yourself mostly. That kind of thing, I think is what I meant when I said it can be very toxic, because yeah, there's almost a a badge, an entrepreneur badge, and the first one you get is how many hours a week do you pack in for your, and that's not the right badge in my mind. But so yeah, set some boundaries. Yeah.
That's fantastic advice. Yeah, setting boundaries early on so that
Mhm.
you don't burn out along that journey, I think is
Mhm.
really, really
Right.
key.
Right. Mhm.
Emma, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you. I wish you all the best with your business, and hopefully even more children will start to learn English and allow them to, fulfill whatever they want to do with being able to communicate with others around the world with that. So thank you for joining me today.
Thank you. It's my absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Balanced Ambition podcast. I genuinely hope the stories inspire you as much as they inspire me. If you found value in today's conversation, please share it with a friend. And remember, by subscribing, you won't miss an episode, and it would truly mean the world to me. Stay balanced, and I'll see you next time.